All right, welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to take a look at Azure Functions and specifically how senior devs, tech leads, and software architects can really use these in the cloud. We're all cloud experts here, so let's just jump right in.
Yeah, Azure Functions are all about efficiency. We want to write less code, less infrastructure to manage, and save money along the way.
Okay, less code and less hassle. I like the sound of that. But what about real-world examples? Where do Azure Functions really shine?
Well, let's start with something pretty common, handling file uploads. Say you have users uploading images. Instead of having a whole separate service just for processing, Azure Functions can jump in right when that file is uploaded.
Oh, okay, I see.
It can trigger a function to resize that image, add a watermark, maybe even run some AI analysis, and you don't need to build some complicated pipeline to do it.
So it's like having a little background helper bot that takes care of all those file tasks, right?
Exactly. And it's not just for files. This idea also works for processing data in real time. Like imagine you're getting a stream of data, maybe from those IoT devices or a live event. Azure Functions can grab that data on the fly, before it even gets to storage.
On a fly.
Yeah, you can transform the data, filter it, even set up alerts based on what you see coming in.
Okay, that sounds super powerful for real-time analytics.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you need a ton of code to make it work with all those different data sources?
Well, that's where triggers and bindings come in. These are like pre-built adapters.
Adapt.
Yeah, they connect your functions to different services without you needing to write a bunch of extra code. So say you're using Azure Blob Storage.
Right.
You can have a trigger that goes off every time a new blob is uploaded. That trigger then sends that blob data straight to your function, all ready to go.
So you're saying no more messing with APIs and SDKs just to work with the data.
Nope. And it works with tons of Azure services, queues, databases, even event hubs for when you have huge amounts of data. You pick the tools you need and connect them with almost no effort.
So we've seen files and real-time data streams. What about adding some intelligence to the data? Can Azure Functions do that too?
Oh, absolutely. Let's say you have a bunch of customer feedback in a queue.
Okay, yeah.
An Azure function could grab each comment and send it off to a sentiment analysis service. It could automatically tag it as positive, negative, or neutral.
So you can see how customers are feeling right away.
Exactly. It helps you understand trends and spot areas to improve. So it's not just processing, but using AI to get real insights.
Okay, I'm seeing how powerful this can be. But what about the boring tasks? Like those scheduled database maintenance scripts we all have to deal with.
Azure functions can help with that too. Think of it as a cron job, but in the cloud. You schedule functions to run on their own at certain times. Database cleanups and backups all happen automatically.
Ah, so it's a built-in scheduler, like for all those routine tasks you always forget about.
Right. And since it's serverless, you're only paying when the function actually runs.
Very cool. So we've got files, real-time data, AI, scheduled tasks. What if we need to build something bigger, like a web API?
Oh, you can definitely do that with Azure functions.
Really?
You can build a whole API with endpoints that respond to requests, handle data, all without managing servers.
So it's like a normal API, but without all the server headaches.
Exactly. And it scales automatically.
Right.
If your API gets slammed with traffic, Azure Functions just spins up more instances to handle it, then scales back down when things are quieter.
That's awesome. No more provisioning servers. So we've got files, data, AI, tasks, APIs. What else can we do with Azure Functions?
Well, how about managing workflows? Those processes with multiple steps. Imagine you need to do something when your database changes. Maybe update a website, send a notification. Azure Functions can handle that whole flow for you.
Like a built-in orchestrator for those business processes.
Yeah, and there's a special kind of Azure function called a durable function. It's made for managing workflows that have a lot of steps.
Stateful workflows. That's interesting. I'd love to hear more about that.
We can definitely dive into that. Okay, so durable functions. For a senior dev working with, complex systems, what's the big deal?
Well, you know how it is with microservices and event-driven architectures. You get these long processes, lots of steps, lots of interactions. Think like order fulfillment, big data pipelines, or even just coordinating actions across your whole system. That's where durable functions shine.
So it's not just a single function that runs and then it's done, like the ones we've talked about.
Right. Durable functions let you define a whole workflow, like a series of steps. We call those activities.
Activities.
And they can run over a longer period of time. The key here is that durable functions manage the state of the whole workflow for you. So if a function has to wait for something, like an external API call, or just for some time to pass, it can save its progress, basically go to sleep, then pick up right where it left off.
Okay, interesting. Can you give me an example? How does that actually work?
Sure. Imagine you're building an e-commerce system. You need to process an order.
Right.
So you might have one activity that checks if the order is valid, another to check inventory, another to process the payment, and so on.
Okay, yeah.
With durable functions, you orchestrate all those activities into one big workflow. You decide how they run, what happens if something fails, how everything works together to finish the whole process.
That makes sense. But wouldn't you normally use something like a message queue for those asynchronous tasks? What's the advantage of using a durable function here?
Well, it really simplifies the code. You don't have to write all that extra logic to keep track of the workflow state, handle retries if something goes wrong, all that stuff. Durable functions take care of all that for you, so you can focus on the important business logic.
So less boilerplate code, more time for the good stuff. I like that.
And because it's all built on Azure Functions, you still get all those serverless advantages: automatic scaling, pay-per-use, no managing infrastructure.
So durable functions are great for complicated workflows. What other situations should we be using them for?
Well, we touched on this before, but responding to database changes. This is another place where Azure Functions can really simplify things. Say you're working on an inventory system.
Okay.
You want to do something whenever the stock level of a product changes.
Right, like update the website or something?
Exactly. You could have an Azure function listening for changes in the database and then automatically update your website, send notifications, even place an order with your supplier.
That's awesome. So your applications can respond in real time without needing to build a complex event system.
Exactly. And that leads us to another important use case: building reliable message systems. Azure Functions can work really well with services like Azure Queue Storage, Service Bus, and Event Hubs. You can build some really powerful messaging solutions.
So if you need to separate different parts of your system, or if you have a lot of messages to handle, or even if you just need to make sure messages get delivered reliably even when there are failures, you can use Azure Functions.
Yeah, you can use these messaging features for all sorts of things, from simple task queues to really complex architectures.
It sounds like Azure Functions are like the Swiss Army knife of cloud development. But with so many options, it can be hard to know where to begin. Any advice for senior devs who are new to Azure Functions?
That's a great question. I think the best way to start is to pick one specific problem to solve. Don't try to do everything at once. Find a place where Azure Functions can really help in your project. Then build a simple proof of concept. Play around with different triggers, bindings, and programming models. See what works for you.
And there are tons of resources online. Microsoft has great documentation, tutorials, even sample code you can get up and running really quickly.
And don't forget about the community. There are tons of developers using Azure Functions and sharing their experiences. So ask questions, learn from others who have been there before.
So it seems like we've covered a lot today. We've talked about simple file processing, complicated workflows, message systems, and everything in between. It's clear that Azure Functions gives developers a really powerful and flexible way to build applications for the cloud.
Absolutely. But before we move on, I'm curious about your experience as a developer using Azure Functions. How do they compare to other cloud platforms and tools?
That's a great question and a perfect segue into our next section. We'll take a closer look at the whole development process with Azure Functions, including the tools, the languages, and the debugging features that make it a really developer-friendly platform.
Right. Let's dive into the developer experience with Azure Functions. What makes it stand out for someone like me, a seasoned cloud developer? What about the tooling and the workflow?
Well, one thing I love about Azure Functions is the flexibility. You're not stuck with one language or one set of tools.
Yeah, okay.
You can use pretty much any language you want: C Sharp, Java, JavaScript, Python, even PowerShell.
So it works for a lot of different developers with different skills.
That's cool. What about the development environment itself? Is it all web-based, or are there some real tools to work with?
You have a lot of good options. You can use Visual Studio Code, or even just the command line if that's your thing. You can develop, debug, and deploy your functions however you're used to working.
So no need to learn a whole new set of tools or change my workflow. That's a big time saver.
Exactly. And it integrates really well with Git and other source control systems, so it's easy to work with your team and manage your code.
Speaking of teams, what about debugging? Things can get tricky when you're working with a serverless environment. What's it like to debug Azure Functions?
It's actually pretty straightforward. You can debug locally or remotely using the same tools we just talked about. You can set breakpoints, step through the code, inspect variables, all the usual debugging stuff. So no more just adding a bunch of log statements and hoping for the best. That's great. What about monitoring? How do you keep track of how your functions are doing once they're deployed? How do you find problems?
Azure Functions works really well with Azure Monitor and Application Insights. They give you a lot of tools to track how your functions are running, analyze performance, and diagnose any problems. You get a ton of telemetry data automatically, so you can see exactly how your functions are behaving in real time.
So you can see everything in one place, like resource usage and errors.
Exactly. And you can set up alerts so you'll know right away if something goes wrong.
That's super important for keeping your applications running smoothly. So we've talked about what Azure Functions can do, how to develop with them, how to debug and monitor them. Is there anything else senior devs should know before they start using them?
I think it's important to think about the different hosting options. Azure Functions has a few different plans, each with its own advantages and disadvantages.
Can you tell me more about those?
Sure. The consumption plan is the cheapest option. It's great for applications that don't run all the time. You only pay when your functions are actually running. But if you need your functions to be really fast and reliable, you might want to use the premium plan.
And what if you have really strict security requirements or you need more control over the environment?
You can also run Azure Functions in a dedicated app service plan or even in containers. That gives you a lot of flexibility and control.
So there's a hosting option for pretty much any situation.
Yeah, and you can easily switch between plans as your needs change.
This has been a fantastic deep dive into Azure Functions. We've learned so much about how powerful and versatile this platform is and how it can help senior developers like us. It's really been great.
I agree. It's been fun talking about this with you.
And a big thanks to everyone listening. If you want to keep learning about Azure Functions and other cloud development topics, make sure you subscribe to the Pragmatic Reviews YouTube channel. We have tons of great content to help you improve your skills.
Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment below. We want to hear what you think.
Until next time, keep exploring the world of technology. And remember, with Azure Functions, the possibilities are endless.